But first, there have been some shocking headlines in Britain. Stories of underage girls groomed by gangs and forced into sex rings. And what's making the cases all the more shocking is that the men involved are of Muslim origin, their victims white and non-Muslim. There are 50 such child grooming rings under investigation. One of the worst was uncovered in the city of Oxford, where the complex issues of race and religion have deeply disturbed the local community.
Oxford evokes images of hallowed Gothic halls of learning, a bastion of British tradition, but now it's also the scene of depravity and unspeakable crimes just a few hundred metres away. Specifically on Cowley Road, where for years a gang used and abused dozens of underage girls for prostitution. The gang members were Muslims, most of Pakistani origin, in contrast to their victims. The youngest of the girls was 11. She had already suffered years of abuse, living in state homes with foster parents or on the streets. The gang found her among the snack bars of Cowley Road. They would ply the girls with small gifts, alcohol and then drugs, until they were dependent, physically and emotionally. Then came abuse and rape, first by gang members, then by other perpetrators who paid the gang.
I was out almost every day away from home, sometimes more than one day at a time. Sometimes I'd have breaks where I went home to my mum and I just ended up in hospital because I'd had so many drugs.
Many in the area knew about or at least suspected the child prostitution ring, but they and the girls kept silent.
They can be told by the abuser that it is in some way their fault, that they're to blame for what's happened, that if they do say anything they won't be believed, or that they will be taken away from their family, they will be taken into a care, they may even be arrested, and all these threats can feel extremely frightening.
Most of the homes and businesses on Cowley Road belong to ethnic Pakistanis. Two of the gang members came from the powerful local Dogar clan. They regarded the girls as property, their property.
These young Asian males have no respect for Asian women. And, you know, our daughters were just known as white trash. You know, as I was told when I was once looking for my daughter, and I asked a young Asian lad if he'd seen her, and he looked at me and said, oh, all they're prostitutes.
In late June, 5 of the gang members were sentenced to life in prison. Another 2 got 7 years each. Over 50 similar cases involving hundreds of girls are currently under investigation in England and Wales. Evidently, prison sentences are not enough. For years, issues involving Muslim perpetrators and non-Muslim victims were swept under the rug in Britain for fear of reinforcing prejudices against minorities. In Oxford, parallel worlds collide. Muslims and non-Muslims tend to coexist separately with little contact. Mashtaq is a taxi driver of Pakistani origin. He grew up on Cowley Road and knows what the situation's like.
They would not mess about with the Muslim girls because the Muslim girls lived in the same community area, and there might be brothers and sisters. They found English girls were much easier because their English culture is completely different to the Islamic culture.
The father of 2 of the gang members is a member of a local mosque. No official representative agreed to talk to us. Now many of Oxford's Muslims feel they're under a cloud of general suspicion.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
They say the worshippers at the big mosque are mostly conservative, but the Muslims here would rather bring the issues out into the open, and they can do that best within the community.
It must start from examining ourselves. These Muslims who are almost all of them have grown up in this society in the UK.
But the society as a whole is faced with the question of how such crimes can be prevented in the future.
you don't have that integration, the conditions that can be put in place for abuse and violence are increased, and that may be one of the factors, certainly in Oxford.
The investigation is to continue until the case is completely resolved. In the meantime, Oxford has a lot to learn about itself and its less picturesque realities.
And authorities are now increasingly under fire for downplaying the race and religion factor in crimes. The notorious Oxford sex grooming ring case being one of the most recent examples. RT's Polly Boyko explains.
Across the country, many have been shocked at the uncovered sexual exploitation rings, first in Rochdale, then Rotherham, Derby, and most recently in Oxford. Gangs of men lure vulnerable young girls, some as young as 10, with presents in order to gain their trust. Then they force them to take drugs, rape them, and finally they sell them off into prostitution. The reported gangs are made up of Muslim men. Their victims, young white girls. So is the government choosing to ignore obvious markers when it comes to these horrific crimes? Race and religion. To talk about the issue, I'm joined by Sean Thomas. He's a writer and journalist. Sean, you've written about the case in Oxford. Is there an elephant in the room? Is the government choosing to shy away from making a connection between these men's religion and their white victims?
I think unquestionably yes in the past. There is some evidence that these crimes have been going on since the early 1990s, if not before. And the reaction of the political and legal establishment to Nick Griffin, that far-right politician, raising the issue was to try and silence him, not to investigate the crimes. He obviously is regarded as being an ethnocentric, if not racist, politician, but they ignored everything he said and instead tried to silence his point of view. And so the crimes went on for another 5 or 6 years at least before they became finally revealed in the last 2 to 3 years.
You've also mentioned in your writing that it was a Muslim prosecutor driving the sentencing in the Oxford case. Do you think anybody who was non-Muslim feared being branded a racist if they looked too closely at the case?
The fact that it took a Muslim prosecutor in the northwest of England to finally cut through and say, yes, there is a problem here, shows that white prosecutors, white social workers, white legal officers and white politicians were very wary of addressing the issue because they are all terrified of being associated with the BNP, with the far right, of being seen as racist. It can ruin careers if you get that label.
The slums of Pakistan's commercial capital, Karachi, are crowded, filthy, and deadly. There are about 5 violent murders here each day. But lurking in the city's primitive sewers is another killer altogether. The polio virus.
They also tell us, of course, that we benefit economically and culturally from opening the doors to the third world. You know, back in 2004, Channel 4 were going to bring out a TV documentary about I'm not going to call it grooming because it's not grooming, and it's not paedophilia as such, it is sexual slavery, and it's based on racial superiority. It's a racial crime. And they were going to bring out this documentary in 2004. The police in Bradford, which is where it was happening, said if you bring that out, the place is going to go up in flames, because they'd recently had riots in Bradford. If you bring this out now, Bradford will erupt.
I was reading a report the other day which said there are now 54 ongoing investigations into separate Asian grooming gangs around the UK. But in itself, that is an astonishing figure. That's 54 gangs. And each of these gangs may have dozens or even hundreds of victims. So we are talking about possibly thousands and thousands of girls who've been abused, raped, and some even probably murdered in the last 20 years because this crime was ignored. I mean, it is very shocking. We have to accept that, yes, white people can also be victims of racial crimes, and I'd say these girls were such victims.
It's just an extraordinary thing, and 10% of the children in this country now are Muslim. And Islam is growing 9 times faster than any other demographic in this country. It's a huge growth, and people get very confused about the fact that when they say they're only 10% of the children are Muslim, and they say, well, that's fine, it's only 10%, you're still 90%. Well, we're not 90%, we're probably 75, 80%, because the other ones, other immigrants are not necessarily Muslim, but they're not us. but we only have between 1 to 1.3 children each. The Muslims are having 4 children each.
The disease festers in the human waste that flows unchecked through these streets and right past Usman's front door. He knows that his own children are at risk from the poor sanitation.
But when you get to the point now where we've got 4 million Muslims in this country, they are going to become 8 million within the next decade, and then 16 million, and then 32 million. And we, meanwhile, are dwindling as a race. Our government is against us, our media is against us, we are losing a racial war, we are losing a cultural war. How did you allow this to happen? And what sort of people were you to sit back and allow this to happen under your noses? Because you were frightened of being called a racist? Really? One word has made you sit back and do nothing while your country was ripped from underneath your feet